Welcome, everyone. Yes, I do think we should start on time. I do think we should end on time. And I do think, as an audience, you're here for the content, and I intend to moderate your thoughts with our guests. So my role, I'm sorry if you want to hear me, you're not going to. Other than to move things along and to make it an interesting discussion. I'd like to ask our panel to introduce themselves, and would you kindly give them the same courtesy when it comes your turn, which it soon will. Please say a little bit about yourself. Why don't I start with a woman who helped trigger one of the biggest cases of its kind in this country. She's the only woman actually sitting on the panel at the moment. Heather Brooke, would you kindly... Hello.
Hello.
Would you kindly introduce yourself and we'll move on.
Okay, I think this is a bit of a slackery job you're doing as chair, that we have to introduce ourselves. But so I'm an investigative journalist and also a campaigner for freedom of information. And I guess my claim to fame is that I did the freedom of information request in the court case that led to the MP's expenses scandal. And I've written a book, which you should all come and buy at some point, The Silent State, which is moving on from MP's expenses, and it talks about secrecy, surveillance, and the myth of British democracy.
And where can you get it? and how much is it?
And can you tell me, why did your court case open the way to the release of MP's expenses? Not at great length, because obviously we can read about it in your book, but could you tell us how did that trigger the release of the information?
Well, it was the reason I did that case. It was a replicate of a case I'd done in America where I asked for my politicians' expense claims, and I was able to go into the state legislature and see all the raw documentation. This is before the age of electronic databases. That was just a series of big giant box files full of receipts of airline tickets and taxis and hotels. So when I came to Britain, I asked for exactly the same thing, and they wouldn't give it to me, and then I ended up with the court case. So I won. After I won that case, all the documentation was scanned into a computer file. However, Parliament then refused to publish it, and it was only by that information being leaked, somebody downloaded it all onto a disk, and then it was sold to the Telegraph, that it actually all came out into the public domain in its raw form.
Welcome. Mark Stevens, there's obviously big legal issues in this. Would you explain what your background is?
Yeah, I'm a media lawyer, usually known for defending free speech and journalists, usually, or their media organisations. Also known for making Freedom of Information Act requests on behalf of journalists and enforcing their rights.
And what era are we living in?
I think we're living in an era where we're trying desperately to use antiquated Victorian laws to keep up with an information age, and the law is creaking somewhat badly.
Mark Stevens, welcome. Simon Rogers, squeaking onto the stage.
Hello. Sorry.
You must be a journalist because you've come in at the deadline. Welcome. You've got the job of saying what you do for a living.
Okay. I edit something called the Datablog and the Data Store at The Guardian, and I guess work in this strange area of data journalism, which is quite a new thing, which Heather's obviously quite involved in. And it's basically using data to generate stories and getting information out of these kind of huge amounts of data that are out there on the web. And obviously this is it's one of the hugest we've had to deal with. This is the leak of 70,000 classified US military documents onto the WikiLeaks sites. On the screen, welcome Julian Assange. How would you introduce yourself?
Well, I've been asked this question a few times. Okay. It's quite interesting to see some critical debate about what we are and in particular what I am. It's a kind of interesting attempt to shift as to whether we are engaged in journalism or whether we engage in activism or something else. And can people hear me okay? I see some frowns.
It's probably at what you're saying.
Oh, that's all right. I mean that. So I would define myself as a publisher, predominantly. That's what I do with most of my time, is organize other people into analysis and writing and publishing, and making material available in such a form where it will have public impact. But, I mean, I wrote, co-authored my first book when I was 25, and I was prosecuted for a magazine I did as a teenager. So I've also written a lot of words of material. And of course, the last 4 years or so, I've been the editor-in-chief of WikiLeaks, and also, I suppose, the principal publisher, although there's many other people involved. And during that time, we've had a lot of success, although it is clearly still a concept that is evolving in different forms. But we can see that some aspects of it really have had tremendous success compared to the amount of labour or money that has been put into them. We sort of started out under the view, looking at the history of journalism and the history of human rights activism, that concealed information has an effect when it is revealed, and it is often concealed because the organisations that know it best, the organisations that are sitting on it, understand that when it is revealed that there is some kind of reform effect, and so the economic work put into concealing that information is a signal, an economic signal, that human rights activists and journalists should preferentially go after it.
Okay.
Because those organisations consider that when it gets out there, it's going to do some good, and that's our experience.
And can I put you in the room on notice? It's your turn next, and also panel for questions and statements. And just one question from me before we throw it open, Julian Assange. You're holding back some 15,000 documents because of your own security considerations, and you've been criticised for putting lives at risk with the current release. Have you set a date for the release of those thousands of documents that you've been keeping back?
Well, we're about halfway through them. I mean, this is a very expensive process. You know, a lot of the recent criticism about Afghanistan was totally expected. Every time we take on one of these big organisations, they try and find various ways to criticise. And there may actually be some legitimate criticism in this case. But we did try hard to keep back some material where it was most probable that people would be named. And we are going through that, and it's an expensive, time-consuming process, and we're about 7,000 reports in. So far, there has been no assistance, despite repeated requests from the White House or the Pentagon, or in fact, any of the free press organisations that we partnered with for this material decided to not take responsibility for actually getting the raw data out to the public. That is, in fact, it appears to be our role, is to get the raw data out to the public, as opposed to just the cherries that organisations decide to selectively give out in relation to their stories.
So you are going to keep with the release. Just be brief, if you could, just to get the discussion going. You are going to keep releasing documents from the Afghan War. Sorry?
Absolutely.
Right. Okay, so over to you in the audience. The broad topic is, what does this do to journalism? And if you don't have a hand up yet, which is understandable, we'll turn to the panel. Firstly, to you, Mark Stevens, what does the significance of what Julian Assange has just told us?
Well, I think it's very interesting. I mean, what we've got is, I think, a new challenge to the traditional form of journalism. And one of the questions I wanted to raise with Julian is, are you accepting just any old data to be dumped using wiki and encryption onto WikiLeaks, or are you actually operating as a journalist would, in the sense that you're soliciting information or gathering information and making an active decision about what you put out on the web?
Yeah, so the answer is neither. Both in terms of our technology and in terms of our philosophy, we try and do something that is different. Now, we consider ourselves in the same way that lawyers consider themselves when they represent clients to the court. We represent whistleblowers to the jury of public opinion. And so it is quite important that we maintain the integrity and impartiality of our process. So we have an editorial criteria. Others would say a criteria which is needed to be met for people to represent themselves to the court. Our criteria is that information has to be of diplomatic, political, ethical, or historical significance, not previously published, and be under some suppressive threat. So that is not founded necessarily under our belief that the public doesn't have, by default, a right to know everything. Rather, it is simply that we are resource constrained. And so we take on that material which is of most likely to benefit our broader goals of reform in the world and producing a just civilization. So it is that subsection of material which is.
Yeah, but I think one of the things that you're focused on here is that you're actually making a decision. Your criteria may be different to the traditional media who you've criticised, and I pass no judgment on that criticism at all. What I do think is worth highlighting, though, is that you are making an editorial decision before you put this information up. And if that's right, it seems to me it's much easier, Paddy, to make a decision to defend it, because it's not just anything that's being put up. There's information which you can decide whether or not to defend, because what you're doing is it's defending an editorial judgment, and that's essentially what we're doing with traditional media.
So you think there is a Journalism Act, there's a Gatekeeper Act going on by Wiki here, which is similar to what newspapers do, although not the same.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure he wouldn't like the association. I mean, he can speak for himself, but
yeah, he will.
I'm sure he will.
Okay.
But I think there is that gatekeeper element to it.
Right, so sit on your hands if you would, Julian Assange. To the audience now.
Yes, my name's James Ball. My question sort of relates to getting the raw data out there. WikiLeaks is stateless and has protections in forms of encryption and anonymity. How far can news organisations which have sort of legal constraints, geographic constraints, and aren't as agile as WikiLeaks go in publishing raw data, and in what ways can they help with that?
Thank you for that. What do you do for a living?
I'm a journalist.
Okay, let's go around the whole panel, ending up with you, Julian Assange. Simon Rogers, editor of The Guardian's Datablog. The Wiki is stateless, possibly trying to play with the rules. The Guardian and the other big broadcasters are not. Can you contrast them for our friend here?
Yeah, I guess we're one of the organisations that cherry-picked some of the data, having partnered up with WikiLeaks, and but I think in a way that's kind of our role, is to help select things which we think are interesting. What we chose as interesting is different to what the New York Times and Der Spiegel chose as interesting. We published a lot more of the data than they did. We published all the ID incidents, and we also had about 300 odd events that were referred to in copy, which we then wanted to link to the report so that people could read the copy and then see the data behind them. And this is really difficult, I know, because we thought, I know that the people involved in the initial discussion with Julian certainly thought very hard about whether we should just publish the whole lot. And I'm kind of in the middle, because the Datablog as a whole publishes tons and tons of raw data. I think that's often that's our job. We select data for people to say, this is interesting, what do you think? But obviously we made a decision then, and then within that we chose kind of certain things to publish in this instance, because it's so huge. For a lot of people, I think it's almost impenetrable to get around it, and so the tools that were on the WikiLeaks site were fantastic ways of navigating around it. We tried to make it easier to navigate around as well. And on the legal side, I suppose this is more from Mark, but I think certainly we are in a different position because we're based in London and you can find us.
I think that that is right. You are based in London, but the question is, will you always be? If the legislation is passed in Iceland, I can see people moving. One of the things that I'm asked to do every day of the week as a lawyer, and there are other lawyers in the room who are asked to do the same thing, which is basically to arbitrage between jurisdictions, to find the most beneficent jurisdiction within which to reveal, whether it's in relation to protection of sources or whether it's in relation to not enforcing a judgment. I mean, I represented Rachel Ehrenfeld. I told her not to come and play in the English courts because they were never going to allow her a fair crack. And now what we have got is the Speech Act signed into law yesterday by Obama, which won't enforce English libel judgments. So, very good idea.
So you're saying that traditional gatekeepers may move to be more stateless?
They may have to, and they may actually segregate themselves so that, you may find The Guardian still on York Way, but you'll find that the internet part or the data dump, you'll have to go work in Iceland. Right,
Tyrannosaurus. So to you, Heather, you've explained how you triggered a release here. Would you respond to the question here? Would you compare the legislatures in the geographies of the world with Wiki and their stateless world?
Well, I just came back from Iceland. I've been working on a BBC documentary about the Icelandic Modern Media Initiative, and I think there is a kind of economic competitive edge that might be happening because of that law, where more restrictive governments will see that there's greater freedom of expression and protection of sources being granted in one country. And just as we have this idea of libel tourism, where the UK's libel law can be picked up by lots of different people around the world because they find it very claimant friendly. They then choose to have their case heard in Britain. I think equally you could then see something like what WikiLeaks has done, where they've taken different laws from across the world and used that to their own advantage.
Yes, defence tourism.
Julian Assange, would you, there's a lot for you to react, so please don't react to it all. Would you cherry pick yourself from the arguments we've heard?
Well, WikiLeaks is not a stateless organisation. I mean, all of our parts are in some state, all of our people are in some state. We've won every court case in every state that we've been in. It is true that we do play some kind of arbitrage between these states, and that prevents the interim abusive process. So we can keep publishing during process abuse proceedings, and when we get to the end of the proceedings, we win. So we're been quite good like that. Now, mainstream media organisations also play arbitrage with states, but they do it in terms of tax structure, and they've put a lot of resources. Even the Guardian tax structure is very complex. I think that these organisations actually historically don't give a damn about getting the truth out to the people. That's why they haven't bothered to structure their information flows in such a way to take advantage of the various jurisdictions, where they've been the first off the block to do it for tax structure. Now, the reason being is there have been relative monopolies in their own countries. So what they've been sort of incentivized to do is to simply have the loudest mouth within their country. And it is the external publishing which is now providing an incentive, a competitive incentive for these organizations to try and gain extra freedom of speech. We are enabling other publications to do that.
Yep.
I'll give you an important example in the UK.
Can it be a brief one at this point? Because we've got, would you mind that? Yep.
Important example in the UK is Task Force 444 was under a D notice, and Task Force 42. Now, those are the killer capture task force run by the UK in Afghanistan. Stephen, I can't remember his last name now, but the author of Ghost Plane, in his Afghanistan book, he had the Task Force 444 removed by his publisher as a result of that D notice. And our publication of that data in public permitted the Sunday Times to then publish their Task Force 444 data. So we are shifting the envelope of what is possible in various countries by providing some kind of external publishing discipline.
Right, okay. And bringing with it the complaint in the Afghan case that there's lives at risk, which we may come to in the evening. Are you happy with the replies you've heard from? To you then, next in the middle row.
Yes, I'm Carl Yeager. I'm the co-founder of A New Planet, Our Future Planet.
Is that an actual orbiting planet, or is it a publication?
It's an internet planet, to be honest with you. It has 3,000 citizens. It's a charity. Anyone can become a citizen. It's free of charge. So far, none of our citizens, we start from scratch. We've drawn a line in time, and we've said, to hell with the rest of our planet. Let's go on the other side and have a new planet. And so that's what we've done. And we've got citizens all over the world who make suggestions as to how they would design a planet's future if they started from scratch. So we have no nations, because no one of our citizens has suggested we have any nations. So we just have a planet. And we have no religions yet. And if you want to have a place where you can make a statement to the whole planet without any trouble, you can just go to Our Future Planet.
And without being rude, by saying you're living on your own planet,
yes.
Are you excited by things that are going on? Heather launched an action that changed our public life. Julian Assange has done something which we're arguing tonight might change journalism. Without going into it, are you saying this is new for you, who's launched a whole new web community? This is on that level.
Oh, it's exciting. Yeah, we would welcome him to be part of Our Future Planet.
Okay, right. We'll sit on that for the moment. You're welcome to make comments. Will you pass the microphone to the blue man behind you with the glasses?
Hello. My question's a bit more straightforward than that.
Would you give us your name?
I'm Ravi. I'm a journalist. I like long walks on the beach, trips to the theatre, etc. I was just wondering, Julian, where you are and what kind of pressure you're coming under from various governments to turn yourself in.
We would like a response to that all of a sudden. Everyone's eyes light up.
I try.
Well, as to where I am, no comment. But there is some pressure, yes. I mean, there's something very serious that should be discussed here, which is the Pentagon, in a 25-minute press conference last Thursday, made the following demands. Demand 1, that we delete everything that we have published in relation to classified material from the United States. Demand 2, that we delete everything that we are going to publish. Extraordinary demand for prior restraint from the United States government body. Demand 3, that we not deal with US military whistleblowers anymore at all. These are demands from the largest military organization in the world towards a press organization. So they are serious. Over the past 2 weeks, between Gates, the Defense Secretary, Mullen, the Chief of the Military, the Pentagon spokesperson, and Gibbs, the spokesperson for the White House, there has been nearly 2 hours worth of airtime given to making various claims and demands on this organization. There are currently, apparently, as far as the Pentagon states, 120 people involved in a task force in relation to us just within the Pentagon. Those are serious demands, and so the question is, what is the response by the world press? Is it going to be a serious response, or is it going to be putting their heads in the sand?
And to be fair, that wasn't the question posed. The question was, what pressure is coming on you? And the Pentagon said, it will make you do the right thing if you don't. So what are you going to do about that? Because their concern is that Afghans are at risk because of what you've done.
Well, I mean, how do you know that's their concern?
I'm just repeating it to you because the question from the audience was, what pressure are you coming under? The answer is you can't go to the US, for instance, isn't it?
Well, those I just gave you, there's an example of a demand from the Pentagon. We have had a volunteer detained going through customs in the United States for 4 hours and asked questions, not being permitted to receive a lawyer, had their 3 encrypted telephones seized from them, their laptop seized and returned. Of course, everything was already pre-sanitized, so there was no possibility of any sort of disclosures involved. There has been approaches to Australian intelligence. There has been extensive surveillance of our people in various countries. There is diplomatic pressure that is occurring. However, that said, I don't think that there is that is going to work. It seems that the various states the Pentagon are pressuring are not actually in a good. That is the right way to go. And our political support is strong enough, although there are attempts to undermine that, to resist that sort of pressure. Okay. And this organisation certainly will not be bowing to threats by the Pentagon or anyone else.
Thank you. And you may not have picked it up at the front, but a lady in the front said, when I asked that subsequent question, that wasn't his answer, that was my answer. She's calling me to account for, leading an interview. Was that an answer to your question in the middle there? Without going on with another one, was that an answer?
Sure.
Yeah,
I just wanted to know if he's getting knocks on the door from the CIA. Really.
Okay, we'll come back to that. Can I just ask you to respond, starting with you, Simon, that I think Julian Assange said that what will be the reaction of the traditional press there? If he is coming under pressure, do you say, that's up to you, mate? Or do you feel a sense of responsibility to him, given the nature of the claims that are being made at the moment?
I think it's an amazing thing, WikiLeaks, and we're a huge supporter of it. So, absolutely, I think it's our role as a campaign for freedom of information, which is behind a lot of what we're about in terms of publishing raw data. We should absolutely be campaigning for that.
Yeah, I think if the freedom of information and openness was really and truly, we not only walk the walk, but we talk the talk, and we actually got the documents and the data dumps, actually there wouldn't be a need for WikiLeaks. The problem is that even though we have the laws, the government's not complying with it. They will shilly-shally, and they will delay, and they will do everything they possibly can to stop us getting what is actually legitimate information, merely because this is embarrassing.
And is he being left on his own, do you think?
Yeah, I think he's being hung out to dry a little. I think it's very unfortunate. I think there's a moral responsibility to anybody who's been using WikiLeaks, whether to receive the information or to pass information over the transom, to help and defend what's going on here.
We're obviously in a really lucky position because we get the wonderful thing of having the information, but not being in the kind of dangerous position that Julian's in. So we're aware of that. So, Heather?
I think there is a level where particularly some British journalists don't like this idea of data, raw data being made available, because there is, I mean, I've seen instances where a lot of journalists do just make stuff up, or they use anonymous sourcing, and they can only get away with that in a very secretive system. So, in fact, I always thought it was odd about British politicians, the fact that they did keep, the way they didn't go along with what I was trying to do, which was the legitimate access of information through freedom of information. Because by not answering my requests, which were made legitimately, they then created this whole black market for what should be civic information available to the whole public. So I think they've actually incentivized leaking by their over classification and their secrecy.
But it's not just wiki, is it? It's sources. I mean, look, very often we have sources coming to journalists because the source is so pissed off that the information isn't being handed out. I had information coming out of number 10 when they were not answering FOI requests that the people in number 10 thought that they should be.
So just to come to you in the audience, are you saying we used to speak in the UK of a fourth estate, which was the media, loosely speaking? Is there now a fifth estate, a fourth estate light in being invented?
I think the problem is that the media has generally abdicated its responsibility as the fourth estate, and it's completely, in a number of ways, let down the public. It doesn't act for the interests of the general public as a whole. It's become co-opted by special interests and people in power. So it's less trusted, I think, than it was as being the the hired gun of the public.
I'm not sure that's right, though, because you just don't have the finance to do it. If you're traditional media, you don't have the finance to actually take the fine.
But actually, another side of that is actually a lot of journalists don't like data because they don't really understand maths or kind of what to do with it. And this is a bit, there's a new thing that for a lot of journalists now, they've got to learn how to use a spreadsheet. So with this particular thing, I had somebody come down from the investigative team and said, "You know about spreadsheets, don't you? We've got quite a big one here." And suddenly it's this thing with 92,000 rows, and they don't really know how to get the stuff out of it.
This is one thing I wanted to mention is that I teach this course at City University Journalism Department, and it's all about how to teach journalists who are traditionally very math averse how to use electronic data and how to analyze it, because traditionally journalists just think stories come from humans or from paper documents. Nowadays they are equally and actually more likely to be found in electronic data, so they need to know how to how to find it, access it, and analyze it.
Julian Assange, we're going to a question in our audience now, and I'll be coming back to you. We've seen you nodding. We haven't forgotten about you.
Hi, my name is Jane Bryan from the One Click Pressure Group. We're internet-based. Julian, I'd like to know your reaction on how Amnesty International et al. Have handled the leaks from WikiLeaks, which many people think we should all have stuck together and helped each other out. And now we hear perhaps uncorroborated statements from Amnesty and the Washington Post, etc., really doing the cause down, I feel. What comment might you have to make on this, please?
Well, it's very interesting. There is, as we predicted, a back reaction, and this particular example of Amnesty is just extraordinary. There is no state-wide Amnesty International, and yet what do we see in the headlines? Amnesty International and other groups, etc., etc. What there was a low-ranking person, a US citizen, working in the UK Amnesty International Asian Interests section, who, together with a few of their contacts in some other groups, sent an email to this organisation well after these allegations came out about not enough redactions occurring, well after the Pentagon decided that was their talking point, sent an email to us to talk about that and said that they were analysing this data. In response, we said, that's fantastic that you're analysing the data, and any examples of where there's innocents named, please send them to us and help us work through this remaining 15,000 that we have. It's quite important. They refused over 3 emails to name any other human rights concerns that they had with the material, any other thing that they were looking at. And during the course of this private email correspondence, which was never terminated on any ill will, but rather was an ongoing process to find out how many bodies we could get from these organizations to go through the last 15,000, someone covertly leaked the correspondence to the Wall Street Journal. There was no official statements. The Wall Street Journal then put that out. Why not just make a public statement? Something very odd and disturbing was going on with that series of correspondence.
To you in the front row, the panel, and two in the audience. You go first.
Lucy Bailey. I work for the NewsHour programme at BBC World Service Radio. And I am very interested in what has happened around the Afghan War Diaries, because having been a long-term admirer, supporter of WikiLeaks, this is what has actually made everything explode. This is what has made the American government pay you the compliment, actually, of spending so much time having a go at you. But as ostensibly what they have fixed upon is the idea that the release of the 92,000 documents did actually put civilians at risk. And I wanted to know what has happened since those accusations in terms of you going through the data that's already online, other organisations helping you to do that, whether anybody has actually found a lot of evidence that civilian informers have been identified, and if so, whether this is a lesson that you can learn from, maybe not putting quite so much data on, or maybe not taking the American government's classification of sources at face value, all this kind of stuff. It seems to me this has to be a learning process, and I would very much hope that WikiLeaks was not going to be undermined in any way by this episode, and I'm curious to know what you and others have done about this.
Well, we have to be careful, first of all, why this is, of course, a serious issue, and I will speak about it. We must understand that we are following the Pentagon's talking points here. That during the past 2 weeks, there's been allegations, seemingly credible ones, by the Afghan government and others, that nearly 100 civilians have been killed in Afghanistan. The Pentagon yesterday stated that, as far as it is aware, no one has come to harm as a result of this release yet. And it's been, nearly 2 weeks now. Now, that doesn't mean that nothing has occurred. That doesn't mean nothing will occur. But we can get an idea of what numbers we are perhaps likely to see in the future, that these are not high. And yet, during that course of time, we have seen continuous killing of civilians. And the material itself documents the killing of approximately 20,000 people. We have to get things in perspective. Now, that said, of course, there's a lot for us to learn in this situation. One of the things we've learned is that human rights organizations, so-called, or at least the people within those emails that we were receiving, and they may have questionable motivations, are not inclined to contribute people to help us with this very difficult task, that the Pentagon refuses to help us with this very difficult task, and that the mainstream media, with the exception of one individual from one individual from the Times, refuses to help us with this difficult task of going through the material. And a lot of people are enumerate. We are talking here about 92,000 documents, an extraordinary compendium of war. It is the product of war and is the product of the very real killing of 20,000 people. Out of that, we have the task of bringing this material into the historical record and trying to get some justice for the victims and potential future victims of this war on both sides. We are faced with no easy choices. We are faced with certain economic constraints. We are faced with the reality that publication often brings justice, and justice delayed is justice denied. We can't sit on material like this for 3 years with one person to go through the whole lot, line by line, to redact. We have to take the best road that we can, and in this case, that was listening to what the other press organisations were saying about material that they are finding, the particular categories that they are finding it in, looking at ourselves and adding those categories to the withhold, and looking at how the US military is meant to treat sources and their confidentiality. Now, it's regrettable that that some number, though the number appears to have been inflated by several organisations, that some number of innocent people are named in that and may face some threat as a result. But that is the constraints which we are under. For other material we are dealing with, we are now faced with this terrible conundrum. Do we go through it line by line? It will cost us approximately $750,000 to do that, and there will be a delay in doing that. Where will the money come from? Because all those people who are so ready to cast blame and pretend that they are concerned about the lives of Afghan civilians are not willing to step up to the plate to actually put the bat in for history. What do we do about that? It's not clear. It's a difficult thing. There are no easy choices for this organization.
Bear with me. I propose to ask for some comments from us all here in the room about what we've heard. But the three topics that are here tonight are: how are organisations changing the way public data is released? Everyone's saying they're changing it a lot. The second topic is, what do the release mean for the mainstream media and government media relations? I intend to move on to that now, but to solicit your comments on this release as we go on through the night. But let me ask you first of all. Everyone in the room has come for this second question as well. Simon, what do this release, the war logs, what does it mean for relations between the mainstream media and government media relations?
Well, I suppose there's always been that feeling, isn't it, that why there's lying bastards lying to us, and now suddenly we've got huge amounts of information that tells exactly why and exactly what's been going on. And the incredible thing about the war logs is just the minute picture of everyday life in that war zone, from these terrible civilian killings through to these troops kind of pitching up a village with humanitarian aid to find nobody wants to speak to them, nobody wants to go near them, and all that incredible detail is just must make this the most documented war in history. I don't know, probably somebody's going to disagree with that, but I'm going to say it anyway. But it also weirdly comes at a time when governments around the world are kind of all committing to opening up public data and public information. This government, whatever you may think of it, has suddenly released tons and tons of information, including huge treasury database onto us. And it kind of, in a way, that throws the bat back to us, that having asked for all this information, we had to work out what to do with it, work out what the best stories are, and help people kind of navigate their way through it. So that's my take.
I think a similar thing is that, well, first of all, it's finally showed a lot of journalists that they can no longer afford to be enumerate. That it's you can do it, but you may not be employed for very much longer in the future, because this is an age of electronic data. So if you don't know how to analyze it and deal with it, then you are really on half a reporter. So if you're looking for stories, you have to know how to deal with electronic data. Also, I think it's about the way we as society look at the powerful, and I think we've often created these fairy tales about people in power, that they're somehow not human, they're larger than life, they're uber-human almost. And what this release does, it really shows you that we entrust these people, but they are actually fallible human beings. And I think we have to renegotiate how we think about people in power, and also take more responsibility, that we can't just pass off all these decisions onto political leaders, that we do actually have to get a bit more involved. It needs to be a bit more interactive.
Mark, hold your fire for now, because there's a whole legal section coming up. To you in the audience, please.
I was it going to be a question, but shall I pose it as a comment?
Just give it a go.
Okay, it's James Thacker. I'm doubly a dinosaur. I write books, and I've been involved with Index and Censorship 72, and I saw you get a prize 3 years ago, so congratulations on your celebrity. The question of trust suddenly has somehow arisen in this, and much of this information, as you were saying, was available in 2001. In fact, perhaps most of it, all of it. Has trust in the written word been increased or decreased by what Wiki's doing, which is a matter of influence? And the second question, Del Ponte was famously influenced by Madeleine Albright to criminalize Milosevic, removing the universal from the Universal Declaration. Has this been a problem from you in addressing the nature of your influence as an editorialist? I mean, you probably don't agree with the PRC's concept of moral center.
Okay, can you hold fire before you answer that, Julian Assange? Because there was a big Q&A at this club with you, but do put that on your list to answer it. Can I deal with the first part of what you said? Will people trust the written word as much? Can I just do a poll in the audience? You've kindly come here, posed by the gentleman in the audience. Will you, as readers and internet eyeballs and viewers and listeners, will you, as a result of this leak, will you trust the written word as much?
Whose written word?
Whose written word? Well, I suppose the written word. Well, you asked the question. Your fault. This question is you live in the microphone.
I'm assuming that there will be all sorts of different kinds of written words, and of course, editorialists. Julian is not really an editorialist. He's using editorial sanction in a different way. But I mean, if we have the whole array of written words, which will be more trusted? I mean, does this discredit the newspaper, the printed press?
Okay, the question is, does it discredit the printed press in a way? Would you put up your hand if you think it does? Because right, a minority of people agree with that statement.
I think that's oversimplistic, if I may. I think actually what you've got is a vast array of documents which give verisimilitude or not to the interpretation given to the material by the journalist. It allows citizens to actually go in and see for themselves.
Okay, lady in the middle here.
Thanks very much. Jennifer Rowell from CARE International, based in Afghanistan. A comment on your comments made a few minutes ago regarding the release of the civilian names. It strikes me, listening to you, that this is a bit of an informant paradox. The source for the media is sacrosanct. You would do nothing to in any way disclose the source of the person or people or organizations who are responsible for these leaks. And yet the informant, once removed, does not seem to be sacrosanct. While it would take a few years to go through those documents, think of all the money that it would cost, etc., etc. What is the difference between the informant and the informant once removed?
Okay, hold that. I'm just taking comments from the audience, and we'll remember it. Would anyone like to add to those comments on the substance of this release? Okay, to the panel. Julian Assange, would you take that first?
The last question.
Yes, please.
So, yes, we have thought about this. Because we have an institutional, a cultural respect for sources, does that come across to sources of spy organizations or sources of military? And to some degree, we have to fight against our own instincts to protect those types of sources. Now, we make a promise to sources who come through us, and I believe in the end that is our role, and that while we understand the benefit of information going out, that in fact we are not obligated to protect other people's sources, military sources or spy organization sources, except from unjust retribution. There are numerous cases where people sell information, not speaking particularly about the Afghan material, but where people sell information or frame others, or engaged in genuinely traitorous behavior. And actually, that is something for the public to know about. It is public right to know about that behavior, unless one of our sources has explicitly instructed.
Okay, thank you. And Heather here. Sorry, the line's gone down, but we'll come back to you, don't worry. Heather Brooke, there was a big interest in who'd leaked the MP's expenses. Was it this wobbly old usher here? Was it this old man in stockings over there? And I don't remember if we found out who it was. But would you give us the benefit of your experience to answer this question here, which was posed? Hello, friend from Afghan Care. Hello. Oh, you're back in the room. It's a relevant question for Heather, is it not? What protection for sources in this data release? Would you stand by while she answers it as well?
Shall I answer it now? Okay. Well, with the leak that I was talking about with MPs, I mean, I think the source is sacrosanct, and the problem was never. I mean, that was the initial frustration with that investigation, was that the Speaker of the House, instead of investigating the actual fraud that was going on, he put all of his energy into finding out who did the leak, and there are some similarities with this case. The thing is, though, I mean, I have some reservations about WikiLeaks, but the main thing is that I kind of feel that it's good in a way, because I feel like, at least in this country, the British government with me didn't know how good they had it, because I did everything by the book, and if they thought using the Freedom of Information Act was problematic, look at what they have to deal with now, and I wonder if that's going to be an impetus on them to release more information in a legitimate way, because the alternative is that, as I said, there does become this black market. There's an incentive to start leaking information.
Would you like to react to that? You can say no.
No, I take that fully at face value, but I'm based in a culture that is born of conflict. And if someone leaks something in Afghanistan and then their name becomes released, I think the consequences are significantly different there, or could be significantly different there than what they would be here. And I fear that in a case like this, you know, when we say nothing has happened for the last couple of weeks, it's a conjecture. You know, how can we make a decision based on the conjecture of what we think may or may not happen? So I take it at face value your point. I think Afghanistan is a whole different ballgame, however.
I wonder if you want to react before I move on to the next topic here.
I think this is something we discussed a lot. I mean, we published 8,000 of the logs, and we did go through them all, and we were paranoid about names, and we did do some redactions on the ones we published. Probably, in retrospect, maybe they didn't need it, but where there was a kind of question of doubt, we did do that. But it was something we kind of discussed a lot. But I guess the other side of that is we're in a really great position. WikiLeaks gets all the risk, and we get to cherry pick the stuff that we want to publish. So I'm aware there's kind of contradiction there, but I think it's a real, it's something that was ingrained in all of us, this kind of protection of sources, and especially something we were really conscious of, certainly with the coverage we were doing.
There's a danger, though, that I see, and I don't think this is restricted to Britain, is that a lot of officials now use the cloak of privacy and national security as a kind of just default position. And so even with the MP's case, their whole argument was based on the disclosure would be an invasion of privacy, and some of them even had the goal to say it would be dangerous to national security. And then, you can see when the receipts come out that getting a new kitchen or Aga oven is not endangering the security of any British people, but it does endanger that particular politician's political life. So I think that is one of the big problems, is that if they just use this, if they use that reasoning all the time about national security, it just becomes almost meaningless, and then you can't tell when is it actually a danger to keep somebody's name private.
You're the person who described it as a paradox. You explained your fears in Afghanistan, but listening to Heather, you're nodding your head. And can I just say to you, do you agree that with your own question, this is you've raised it, the informant paradox. You said it for a reason because you're worried, but you're nodding at your head at this idea of everything Argas and fish tanks.
I nod in full understanding of what she's saying, but again, I'm not sure that actually relates to the case in Afghanistan and what we may find. And I know that this is not the role of the media to worry about, but what I do fear is that some people will stop trusting being able to engage in informing whomever of whatever they have to inform, because they fear that their name is going to be released on the internet. So that's not the media's problem, I realize, but I think it's part of this context, and in fact could change the nature of journalism as well.
Data has no ethics, does it? That's kind of what you're saying.
I think people have ethics, and people rule data.
Well, there's another investigation that I've tried to do in Britain, which is about witness protection programs, and the police continually will never release any data about that. I mean, not the amount of witnesses they have under protection, not their budgets, anything. And that's all because of, they'll say it will endanger those people. But the converse is that there is actually a story to tell that possibly the police don't protect those witnesses very well, and that they don't spend enough money protecting them, that they actually make all these promises to the witnesses and then they just leave them out to dry. And I wonder if there's a similar thing happening with the U.S. government and informants. Do they make similar promises which they then don't follow up on?
But there is a thing here which I think, the journalists are not being as honest as they could be here. They know they would never burn their own sources. So actually what they're doing is burning the sources of spies, if you like. And so that at one level is a fairly unattractive proposition. And so I think there is an issue there which needs to be dealt with, because there's a confrontation.
So the fact these names are not protected in the data suggests the US is already not protected.
Right, that's not going to work because not everyone's going to hear you. So I'll give you the microphone, but I won't. I'm going to be cross with you. So so say it again. And
I was just saying, does the fact that these names were already in this data unprotected not suggest the US wasn't protecting sources itself?
Well, the problem was that the data was then given over unredacted. You could have actually used the data in a redacted form. I think that's the question. But I don't condemn people for it. I just say it's part of a learning process.
Let's move on to the third element which brought you here this evening, which was what are the legal implications of the release of the files. The first topic we tried to cover was the leak changing the way public data is released. Then we moved on to what does it do for the mainstream media and government media relations, and the final and third, with a roundup from you at the end, is what are the legal implications. Mark, what are the legal implications of the War Logs files release?
Well, I mean, clearly there are all sorts of legal implications. The fact that people have reportedly in America asked allied states to bring criminal proceedings against Julian Assange and others associated with WikiLeaks, that they're looking for international cooperation over it, that there appears to be breaches of the Official Secrets Act, perhaps. There are all sorts of things, maybe questions about data protection that also come into play. So there's a whole raft of issues which are potentially flagged up here.
And can you compare it to another part of your career? Was it like, the introduction of the internet? Is it bigger than that? Is it bigger than, what is it?
I think it's significantly bigger than that. I mean, what actually we've got is a fundamental challenge to the rule of law. The rule of law is nationally based. There's very little effective international law in terms of this kind of activity. And that's why WikiLeaks works, because it arbitrages between the different jurisdictions. It plays off between different countries and their different legal systems, and it pays off to the advantage.
Can I just say that, interestingly, kind of in addition to this, I've had 2 or 3 mails from researchers in the US and other places asking if they can get into trouble for using the data in their research, which is interesting that it's kind of talking about, maybe it kind of creates a climate of people worried about even, kind of accessing the data itself.
Let's go to the phones, as they say. Julian Assange, would you answer that question from your perspective? What are the legal implications?
Well, first, I just covered something that we had missed before, which was verisimilitude. And, I've been pounding on that we should try and strive for something called scientific journalism. And the reason that scientists are the most respected opinion leaders is because when their papers are published, they are published with the full data. And that allows other scientists in a competitive environment to shoot down the bad papers. And we have seen cases where, for example, the Telegraph published a leaked document. We got hold of the leaked document. And we find out that the Telegraph quotes taken from that document, they didn't publish the full document, were changed. And that's an example of media being able to lie to the public or twist and distort information to the public without accountability.
Let me just say, they're not here, are they? But would you kindly go on with the broad question about the legal implications in wider general, just so we get the discussion?
Yeah, so this extraordinary levels of fear we see in the United States are not represented in law. The First Amendment is very clear in law, and that appears to be one of the reasons that the United States is lobbying allies to outsource their censorship, because the First Amendment is quite clear. This is a form of, if you like, intellectual rendition that the United States is trying to apply to other countries. And that has got to be pointed out and resisted. This organisation has never lost a court case in any state. So I reject this view that we are stateless. We are able to arbitrage to prevent abuses of process so far. And maybe one day it will come down to a court case in some place we will lose. That day has not happened yet. I am concerned that the level of fear that is not about the law, that there's a deep instinct in men that the law is simply whatever powerful people want. And that is either that is a true description of what we are in the West, or it's not. And I hope to God that it's not. And if it is not, we should start acting like it's not. If the law is what the Supreme Court in the land says the law is not what a billionaire says it is, and it's not what some two-bit general says it is.
And under the international law, war is a term that can be used to describe a conflict, isn't it? Law, over the years, international law has codified war. Do you believe that your release might challenge international law on war and on conflict?
I have no no, I have not looked at that to understand whether there is any codification in that. I mean, what would you be suggesting? That we are engaged in an act of war by the disinformation? No,
I'm certainly not. I was just thinking that the question one of the questions that everyone's interested in is what's the legal implications of what you've done? You mentioned specifically about the international world, and I was just wondering if you had a view on the international law. So I'm not accusing you of launching a war.
I mean, there doesn't seem to be any. They're simply looking at the jurisprudence. There simply seems to be no legal implications whatsoever. Now that doesn't.
Actually, Julian, that's got to be wrong, hasn't it? There are clearly legal implications. Whether you feel that you're going to win the cases or not, there are cases that can and probably will be brought against you, partly out of this, maybe out of future cases. But they are going to be cases that are brought, and they'll be brought in courts of various countries. And your very sexy soundbite of intellectual arbitrage, as intellectual rendition, I certainly understand that. But eventually, cases are going to be brought, and what the purpose of those cases is exactly the purpose that you're talking about. It's about the chilling factor. It's about trying to chill down coverage of what you're doing and trying to actually prevent it. If people really wanted to stop WikiLeaks, why didn't they just go to ISPs and block access at the ISPs so that we as members of the public can't get to you? That's what they do with
Iran and China.
That's what they do with paedophile material.
In Iran and China and Thailand, they do that.
Yeah, well, they do it in Iran and China and Thailand, but they also do it in this country in relation to paedophile material and many other European countries. And as a result of that, clearly they could do it if they wanted to. Somebody has made a decision not to do that.
Julian Assange, would you like to react to that from Mark?
Well, I think it is politically untenable. I mean, this organised, I saw a quote by in a Fox panel that. Why does WikiLeaks only publish material about the United States military? They should be, they never do the tobacco industry. And so actually, if you go to WikiLeaks and Google for tobacco, you will find some 280 references. There's a sort of media distortion occurring in relation to what we do. I think we actually have broad-spread political support. Looking at an extraordinary figure from the Pew Research Centre, a conservative media research body, which surveyed 1,000 people last week in result of this issue. It was the number 1 recognised media story, even more than Chelsea Clinton's wedding. Interestingly, 6% of people wanted more information about Chelsea Clinton's wedding. The vote, the support for Obama's Afghan policy dropped some 11%, from 54 to 43%. The total coverage of war in the United States trebled during that week. The total coverage from 6% to 18%. And getting to what you were asking, the majority of people under the age of 50 stated that it was in the public interest for WikiLeaks to have released classified information about the Afghan war. Now, that's extraordinary to me. I thought that would have only been about 20% of the population. But the majority of people under the 50 and it's just slightly reversed for people over 50, so about 50% of the population believes that it was correct in the United States for us to release classified information about the war in Afghanistan. And that is not something you would regularly pick up and see. So there's some vocal minority that is banging on about this issue and trying to equate patriotism with classified information. But that is not what at least 50% of the population thinks in the United States.
Okay. Thank you, and thank you for reacting with lots of different voices. It's probably hard to know what the intention of some questions is. And would you, in the front, have a question? I must declare an interest. You're a colleague of mine,
yes.
But I will be strict with you. What are the legal implications of the release is where we've moved on to, with closing thoughts in about 15 minutes from everyone.
On the site, on the War Diaries site...
Sorry, would you say who you are?
Yeah, sorry, Chris Valance. Radio 4. On the War Diaries site, there's a 1.4 gig encrypted file. It'd be lovely if you tell us what was in it. I suspect you won't. But how is using encryption like that a technique that you envisage being used to prevent things like prior restraint and other legal threats?
Yeah, so we have, over a long period of time, distributed encrypted backups of material we have yet to release. And that means all we have to do is release the password to that material and it's instantly available. Now, of course, we don't like to do that because there's various harm minimization procedures to go through. But we understand the historical significance of the material that we have been publishing, the material that we will publish in the future about a number of different countries. And that duty to history is something that weighs heavily on us. That we, if you had the Stasi archives in your pocket, that is a very heavy pocket indeed. And so we take precautions to make sure that that sort of material is not going to disappear from history, regardless of the sort of threats to this organization.
Okay, so would you take this on now next from us on the panel, Simon Rogers? That people are talking about technical and legal. What this release, what does it mean for the law, and how much is it going to introduce new journalists and new lawyers who understand how to get at it and what encryption is?
I suppose the thing about the internet is, this old thing about a lie being halfway around the world before the truth's got its boots on is kind of really amplified by the net. But what the net also gives you is access to this kind of amazing information, and as far as I can see, it just makes it almost impossible to stop it. And how do you release it? It's like holding back a flood, and that's great for journalism. And I suppose what we have to look at next is how we handle that and what we do with it.
But what do lawyers do then?
What do lawyers do? Yeah, they hold back the flood. I don't know. I think Mark's help us kind of. I'll find a way through it, and that's kind of.
I think that there will be people who will try and do it, but I think they'll do it at the pinch points. The pinch points are the backbone of the internet. That's where they're going to start to do it. And unless you can actually move the material around more broadly than that, that's where they're going to start to interdict.
And Heather, and the question in the front here, thanks. Heather? Specifically on the junction between what technology allows this question about an encrypted file up there and how the law comes after you, and you've trod your path through that.
I think we're really at a pivotal point in history right now where the technology has given us the greatest chance to have a real, true representation of democracy, where we do get more access to information than we've ever had before. But equally, technology is only a tool, and I think what you can see in a lot of countries is they're using the technology to shut down information. So they're closing down ISPs, they have blacklists, you have the Great Firewall of China. So I don't think it's all one way. I mean, yeah, we could be on the edge of a great new world order of access to information for all, but equally I think that we could be in a kind of new totalitarianism where we're all under surveillance in a greater extent than we've ever experienced. So it's kind of up to people really to decide how they can deal with the internet, if they can deal with the chaos of it. And I think the thing about WikiLeaks, it's quite a blunt instrument. It's just shoving stuff out there, and it makes people very uncomfortable. And I think they react to it in quite sort of extreme ways. They either love it or they hate it, and they get, if they hate it, it just challenges everything they've ever been brought up with about authority and all that sort of thing.
What does it do to you?
Well, I don't know, because as I've spoken to Julian Assange before, I don't like, I stay within the boundaries, sort of traditional boundaries, and that's why I use the Freedom of Information Act. But then I'm torn because the fact was that I got scooped by somebody who leaked it. So I would like it to be a kind of lesson for politicians that the more they try to hold back the flood, the more it's going to lead to the sort of blunt instrument of a WikiLeaks, instead of a more sort of mature and thought out release to the public.
But the security services of all the countries of the world are torn, really, because in many ways they want information out there in relation to totalitarian regimes or regimes which they're hostile to, but they don't want it out in relation to their own regime. So if you took, for example, Libya or North Korea, and Julian Assange had dumped 92,000 pages from North Korea, would we be having this same level of concern at the moment? I suspect not.
I think it's interesting too that in America, and I'm American, but so you've got part of the American government, the State Department, giving lots of funding to the Berkman Institute, all about how social networking can transform developing countries like Iran, to use social networking to kind of foment revolt and stuff. And then you've got, on the other hand, another arm of the American government saying, no, all this sort of madness of the internet is terrible and we've got to lock it down and start controlling it.
Mm. Hello, my name's Chris King. I'm not a journalist. It seems to me that one of the things that was mentioned briefly earlier, it seems to me that WikiLeaks was instrumental, or certainly important, in getting the progress towards the Icelandic media laws passed. And what effect is that going to have on WikiLeaks and other countries' legal systems and press if that actually gets passed?
Now, thank you for raising that, and can we make this the last of the legal questions, and then your audience, you can bring in your general comments and we'll close. You were nodding, and I recognise an Icelandic journalist in the room. How much did WikiLeaks change the law in Iceland?
I think that this is a very interesting idea. And I mean, what we're doing is taking the offshore banking business and turning it into the offshore word business. And it does seem to me that if it's good enough for people to avoid paying tax, it's good enough to avoid revealing sources and perhaps getting information out there. And I think what it will mean is that major news organisations, global news players, will start to migrate to places which are beneficial for them doing their business. They're going to move away from countries where the cost is expensive, so they're going to move away from America because it has great First Amendment, but actually the damages awards that they have there are absolutely massive. I mean, the largest award made was in Texas in the MMAR case against Dow Jones for $670 million. I mean, it's a potty amount. Cases in this country, modest cases in this country, cost $1 million or $2 million to defend. Of course, the lawyers take most of that, and the maximum you can get in damages are, a couple of $100,000. So, it really is a problem, and so I can see the incentive, the economic incentive, to move to locations which are benign for the media.
So would you like to react to that, Julian Assange? Sticking just to the law, but we've got general comments coming. If you could kindly stick with the discipline.
So the Icelandic Modern Media Initiative is very dear to my heart, and a lot of my intellectual thoughts went into that initiative and were taken up passionately by people in Iceland and elsewhere. There were about 12 consultants from around the world who came to Iceland to help pursue that. What we saw, looking at Sweden as one of the models, is there's a new type of refugee in the world, and it's publishers. Publishers are now refugees. And if the one internet service provider that we use in Stockholm, we see that the American Homeowners Association publishes out of Stockholm because they're continually sued by property developers in the United States. Now, there may be a First Amendment, but if it costs you millions of dollars to use it, it's worthless to activist organizations and other small publishers. Similarly, Malaysia Today is no longer published in Malaysia. All the Chechen newswire services are, of course, not published in Russia. And that movement for refugee hosting for publishers to publish elsewhere is an economic force that is sliding across the world and shows that something like the IMMI can work economically. And of course, politically, Qatar shows the power of having media based in your country and tied up with the destiny of your country.
Okay.
So politically it's going to work for Iceland, and economically it's going to work. And we can see that there are sort of the forces of darkness and the forces of light in terms of legislative reform. We can either end up with a harmonization of law on the internet as states collide and interact. We can end up with Chinese law, or we can end up with Swedish, an amalgam of the First Amendment and some Nordic states. And That is the law that I want to see on the internet, and we are pushing for that legislative reform agenda.
The problem, of course, with this is that the jihadi websites all moved to America because of the First Amendment. They've had to migrate out again. And, of course, the suggestion would be that websites of that nature would go to these places, and that also presents a problem of its own.
Thank you. So, forgive me. Let's move on to the general. Do introduce what you wanted to say in your general remarks, Julian Assange. Members of the audience, let's move to a close. Please bear in mind that Julian's waiting on something which I interrupted him, just for the sake of time. The things that haven't been raised, the final 10 minutes, over to you.
Can I be slightly naughty? One very small question on the law, if I can.
No, you actually can't. I'm sorry. Everyone else is here, you can come back and ask them at the end. So, general closing remarks.
Fair enough.
You can have a general remark if you like.
Can I take Julian to task over science?
You can in a minute. You can have a general.
I'll turn it into a general remark. James Perry from the London School of Economics. I just think that we've been a bit vague about what the law is, and what I'd be interested in knowing and walking away tonight with is what in Britain is the most damning legislative instrument against what Julian is doing. And what is the Act and the provision that we can all walk away with and look up?
Official Secrets Act.
So would you kindly tell him?
Official Secrets Act.
The Official Secrets Act. Would you kindly keep the microphone? I'm not trying to shut you down, just move you on.
Is that a civil or is that a criminal?
Criminal.
Of all the topics that brought us in here tonight, the ethics, the journalism, is that the thing that interests you the most, the law?
It was, yeah,
okay.
Absolutely.
And have you learnt something from what everyone's been saying tonight?
Well, at least in terms of what I can actually look up with some sort of tangibility, it's the Official Secrets Act, is it not?
Yeah. And will you answer the question that brought us all in here tonight? What do you think WikiLeaks is doing to the law?
I think the answer to that is one that will be answered when there's a test case. The test case will come in Washington, in Canberra, in Britain, and the answer to that question will be determined by a judge based on an interpretation of the Act that's just been mentioned, and I don't think we can answer that now. It's for the judiciary to determine where the boundaries are.
All right, Julian Assange, I know you'll want to react to that, and you can. Just closing remarks from the audience and the panel.
Hi, this is Alexei Mostras from The Times. I'm sorry if I missed...
Everything?
Yes.
Yes.
Sorry if I missed quite a lot. Julian, can you just comment on... I'm interested in this refugee status point. If you or anyone else is a refugee, then who, if anything, are you accountable to? And what kind of accountability can we set up that is not bound by states? And then the second thing, which I almost certainly have missed, is what is the status of your releasing the remaining 15,000 documents?
Yeah, that was handled right the first thing. So, Julian Assange, would you answer his other point?
Yeah, so the question about accountability. Once again, all our people are in particular states, and they are accountable to the states in which they live in. Now, many organisations use international structuring to avoid paying taxes. This organisation uses international structuring to reveal the truth to the public, and it's time that activist organisations and journalists who are serious about their endeavour of documenting history use various states and laws to pursue that agenda. Now, you might complain that one state is not harmonious with another state and there are influences between states, but we've always had this. And consensus develops as a result of sorts of international pressure that produces some forms of accountability in different areas. But there's an important, vital philosophical understanding that must be seen, that knowledge and the rights of the people to know what is happening in their environment is different to most other rights, because all other rights need the communication of knowledge to defend themselves. Every right that you've heard about, it has been communicated to you. So the right to communicate knowledge is to some degree above all legislation, and that understanding is codified in the United States in the First Amendment, which takes the press outside of the legislative agenda. The legislative agenda, and indeed the Constitution itself, is something that is formed out of the communication of knowledge by the people. If we have the legislative agenda or the judicial agenda regulating knowledge, we have the legislative agenda and the judicial agenda regulating itself, and there is no proper external regulation. We immediately see corruption. And we can see this with censorship lists. The first information to be censored on censorship lists is information about censorship lists, and it spreads out to proxies and ways to bypass censorship lists. But as soon as you have the ability to regulate the free flow of knowledge, systems become corrupt. So I would say that there must be a prima facie right to communicate. And in fact, we see that when we distribute mail. We expect that our mail is not going to be read and blocked if it says the wrong thing. We see that when we call our grandmothers. We don't expect that the government is listening in to the conversation, understanding whether we're saying the wrong word or not, and about to hang up. And we see that with email that we send to each other. And we see that when we are all in one room together talking. So, in fact, the right to communicate knowledge is the founding right of civilization and must be treated with great respect. And where it is curtailed, there must be strong evidence for that curtailment.
And to the audience?
Yes, my name's Ian Boll. I'm visiting from California. I'm a historian of technologies of information. I just wanted to thank Julian for coming out from behind the curtain. On behalf of all of us who recognize a fully moralized voice in a world where, present company accepted, what the press mostly represents, one has to say, is a kind of stenography of power. We thank you for that. I would like you to comment on the fear that I have for whistleblowers everywhere. I've read an account of whistleblowing in the US, and the story is very grisly for those who do blow the whistle. Obviously Afghanistan is a particularly special case. And perhaps he could say something about the state of Bradley Manning as well right now. Thank you.
Okay, so I'll just remind everyone, Bradley Manning is a suspect by the US military in the release of a video that showed an attack and the death of people, including a Reuters cameraman, and he's being moved from Kuwait to the US. Can I ask you, you've introduced this as a closing remark, so bear in mind that this is how the time is going to be used of all the topics we can. Julian Assange, will you answer that question about whistleblowers and about the alleged link to that question of Bradley Manning?
Well, the public whistleblowers do face enormous problems. I mean, in terms of employment, sometimes in terms of prosecution. However, confidential whistleblowers, it's almost nothing. I mean, we, of course, have, as press, we have been speaking about the crackdown on sources by the Obama administration, which is really quite extraordinary compared to Bush, and we're now talking about 4 serious national security cases. But that's out of a population of 300 million. Statistics were released showing that the FBI only opened 200 cases in the course of the past 4 years or so. 18 of those resulted in suspects and none resulted in a prosecution. So actually, for confidential sources, the chance of being caught relative to population size is nothing at all. For public whistleblowers, it's a different story, and that is why it is vital to have a mechanism for people to anonymously safely communicate to the public. Now, in the case of Bradley Manning, a young 22-year-old intelligence analyst who was in Baghdad, who was being fingered by an unfaithful journalist as being the source for the helicopter video, and there are some allegations that he's a person of interest and related to the leak in Afghanistan. He is a young man that is potentially facing 52 years in prison or more, depending on what the grand jury says. Now, he's very unlikely to get that. He may get 20 and serve 10, that's something like that, or he may get off entirely. We're not sure. He had a demonstration outside his prison last week, the first one with some 80 people. I believe there's a march in Washington or another area this week. If the allegations against him are true, and if his the recorded statements to that journalist who was alleged to have betrayed him are true, he really is the Daniel Ellsberg of our age, and really a hero. But we see in the New York Times yesterday an extraordinary depoliticization of this young man, where all his stated political reasons for doing this are thrown out, and it's instead talked about how he once picked up a man at a gay nightclub. I think that sort of behavior by the New York Times is just disgusting. To take it an extremely serious issue with this young man who is not really able to communicate to the press, who is effectively voiceless, and write like a tabloid. If this young man turns out to be Daniel Ellsberg of our age, what a slight on that organisation.
So closing comments now from you in the audience, and the main issue, if you want, which brought us all here tonight, what's it done? You start us, we'll go to the panel and back to the audience.
Hi, Cassie Verber, I'm a journalism student. I think we'd all defend our rights as individuals to have personal secrets, and I was wondering who else has the right to secrets? Do governments, do states, do leaders, do politicians?
Is this for the closing remarks, or
you can answer this, and then we'll come back to your closing remarks.
Okay. Well, the strange paradox, and this is one of the whole points I write about in The Silent State, is a situation we're in now where states feel that they have a right to keep secrets, and they feel they've got a right to privacy, and yet totally inversely, they feel they've got a great right to invade the private person's private life, and they're exactly running simultaneously. So as the state sort of shuts down access to information, civic information, which we've all paid for, the creation of it, and it's created in our name and supposedly for our benefit, it's also putting us all under massive surveillance in a way that we've never been before, and largely kind of not thinking about our rights to privacy. So I think that's a really odd, I mean, one thing that this does raise is just the way we view privacy, which is coming into, and we're having a new exploration of what is privacy in this age where we're all networked up, and where the state and our private lives are in great proximity.
There's a simple phrase in Berlin which answers this question, which is popular amongst the citizens of Berlin, which is transparent government, not transparent people. And the need for transparency increases with the degree of power. And individuals who are not powerful, who are not in position of power, it doesn't matter whether they're transparent or not to the rest of the society, because their ability to abuse power is minimal. And as power increases, transparency must also increase. Now, individuals, we should say, their rights are limitations on government. That is, if you like, the definition of right, the limitation of coercive force that government can apply. And you don't have a right to stop people gossiping about you. That is not a right that you should be given, because that is what you're saying when you say right. You mean ability to apply coercive force to stop someone else doing something. And applying coercive force is an extremely serious matter, and it should be reserved for serious matters.
So, Simon Rogers, yes, all right, go on.
Julian Assange is talking about privacy. He's thought about it deeply, as have most of the people on this panel, I suspect. What in truth is happening is that there's a Mephistophelian pact being made with privacy, but we're sleepwalking into that pact. We're not actually going in with our eyes open as a society, as a community, and as a people at large.
So, closing remarks, Simon Rogers. What was happened tonight that changed your mind, and what's the main lesson you've learned?
From tonight or from the WikiLeaks?
Both, everything.
The one thing I was just going to add to that, because they've both summed up much better than I could, is I think governments are just the worst organisation to decide which of their things should be kept secret or not. If you look at all the stuff, from MPs' expenses to this Treasury coins release, which the Treasury fought tooth and nail against for years and years and years. Actually, when it comes out, it's what possible justification could they ever have for keeping it secret? So, okay, on WikiLeaks. I think there are a few things. First thing, from my kind of point of view, is that I think it's the end of the non-numerate journalist we're going to get more and more of these stories. And if you can't handle data, then you should be looking at maybe doing something slightly different, like I don't know, gardening or something. I think the other side of it is also previously there's been a lot of talk about the internet being the death of traditional journalism and mainstream news organisations and so on. And what this showed for me is actually there is a real role. You've got great reports like we've got this guy Declan Walsh who's in Afghanistan, fantastic reporter, and he could look at a lot of the stuff that's in WikiLeaks, say, well, that intelligence report is fanciful, or that I was at that instant, I can remember it all. It kind of brings something that we can add to the story, add to the data, and kind of a context and analysis, and that's, I think, is our role as a news organisation, is helping people kind of navigate through this kind of enormous sea of information, get what's useful out of it, and also kind of provide a real kind of expert view, which we have. So,
Mark Stevens.
Well, I think we have to remember that the law is supposed to be reflective of the values and norms in society, and I think what we're doing is WikiLeaks is clearly making a monkey of the law at the moment. And what it's doing is signposting this move away from the traditional media where we sit passively, a paper comes through our letterbox, a television or a radio radiates information to us, to a situation where actually we're interacting with the media much more. It allows us to actually go out and search and Google up. And if you look at the correlation between news agenda and search terms, you will actually see that change in society is taking place. And I think WikiLeaks is the big signpost to that.
And to you, Heather, I explained that you had your own role in this as well. Would you give us some closing thoughts?
It's made journalists think about what they do, I think. What exactly is your role as a journalist? Is it just to entertain? Is it to inform? If it's to inform about what? Just to, as that man said, be a stenographer for power? Or is it to try to do some kind of verification of what's actually happening? So we're increasingly, I feel, as a journalist, sort of deluged by all these public relations people and spin doctors, and we're given an official version of events, and what the journalist is meant to do is kind of go beyond that and check, increasingly using raw data to see if that official version of events is actually matched up by on-the-ground reality. And I think that's where we increasingly see that data is one of the key ways to do that sort of verification. So as Simon said, if people aren't able to deal with data, then it makes them a very weak journalist.
And Julian Assange, I cut down a question earlier asking you to remind us about the timetable of the release of further documents in the Afghan War Logs. And what did you take away from tonight that might have been new to you?
Well, journalist is a stenography of power, is I think my favourite quote of the evening. I'll be sure to remember that frequently. What a beautiful thing. But I'd like to say on the law, I receive drafting laws and being involved in that process. What we see, with some rare exceptions, is that lawyers look within the system and how to work things within the system, and legislators look to see, good legislators look to see how they can change the legal system to conform with the new reality. And actually, if we look through the long reach of history, law is a description of practice. It is not a definition of what practice is to be. And as the world interacts, we are changing what is easy to do in an economical sense, or in an easy to a moral sense, or philosophical sense. And law must then follow that practice. And that's how international law arises, or originally arose, if you have ships interacting with each other or countries interacting with each other. So the law must be seen as most correct when it follows what practice is and the feelings or the will of people and companies and the world in its interactions.
And what's the timetable for the release of the 15,000 documents?
Well, it is resource bound, and we are trying to collect people to go through that material and others. But I mean, if we have more resources, we can get through it more quickly. We continually ask the Pentagon to provide those resources. It says it's not interested in a conversation about harm minimization, which should be no surprise to those people here who are aware of what the Pentagon has done in the last 2 weeks in Afghanistan.
So listen, it's reluctantly I'm going to call it to a close, but can I thank the panel? It's difficult to be in the position of Julian Assange, not just what he's doing, but to be in this outside source. It's difficult to hear who's talking at you, and thank you for wherever you are. And here on the panel with me, we've got Simon Rogers from Datablog, Heather Brooke, and also Mark Stevens. Thank you very much.